So, hello everybody, and this is the 57th class. We're on chapter 8, and we started last time with explaining the difference between following God and walking before God. And we saw that Noach had achieved the level of following God, walking step by step with God, and that Abraham was told by God to become tamim, to become whole, to become earnest by walking before him. And we explained the difference between these two levels of divine service. That Noach's level is what is called the earnestness of emotion, or the earnestness of the heart. And Abraham's level is called the earnestness of the will. Now there's something that I didn't mention last time. I want to mention something more about it. That actually, in a certain sense, the difference between what the Baal Shem Tov did when he founded Hasidus and the direction that the Alter Rebbe took Chabad is a little bit the same by analogy as the difference between Noach and Abraham. How so? That Noach, his life story is obviously about the ark. And it's about weathering the difficult circumstances in life. Weathering, pun intended, meaning that the ark had to be seaworthy, and it had to withstand the turbulent waters of the flood. And so, following God is how to survive the ups and downs of life, just as the ark survived the ups and downs of the teeming waters that hit upon it. So to follow God, to walk step by step, and to learn from our circumstances what God wants from us, that's the path that the Baal Shem Tov showed. The Baal Shem Tov showed that this is based on faith. In that sense, the Baal Shem Tov taught us faith. And faith means earnestness of emotion, as Rashi says, is to be with God in the sense of never questioning the circumstances, but rather taking our cue from them to know what is expected from us in life. Circumstances are everything that's around us. And faith, like we said, is like the great circle that surrounds all of reality. That everything is really in God's hands. And that, the person who knows that the best is the seafarer, like Noah. Somebody who had to weather the most difficult storm ever in all of history, the flood. And so the ups and downs of life don't affect you as much if you have faith. But the Alter Rebbe taught something different, which is like Abraham. And as we saw in chapter 7, I believe, or 6 even, I'm not sure where it was already, the Baal Shem Tov wanted to go in that direction, to turn faith into confidence. And confidence is not about learning what you need to do from your circumstances, but rather by learning from your inner core what your mission in life is. And in that sense, you create your circumstances, you work to change them. And that's the service of Abraham, which is called walk before me and be earnest. And we said that this is called the earnestness of the will, that the person learns from his will what they want to do and what they need to do in life in order to fulfill their existence. Okay, So let's read this again. The Torah describes Noah in the following manner. Noah was a righteous, earnest man in his time. Noah walked with God. The manner of walking described in this verse is with, meaning that Noah followed God step for step. The Almighty seemingly made a step through the circumstances, and Noah followed him. But at the beginning of the parsha of circumcision by Abraham, God commands Abraham, walk before me and be earnest. The manner of walking expected from Abraham is to walk before God, to take the initiative, and God will seemingly follow. As it were, follow, meaning this is a figure of speech, but what it means is that God created man and created Abraham in order to forge a direction in the world, and not just to weather the storms. This, by the way, I saw today a terrible misrepresentation of what bittul, of what nullification means in Chassidus. And it's by a person who claims to understand enough to be able to teach it. But what was more disturbing was that this person was teaching it to people as an alternative, almost, meaning he was teaching really Buddhism, and he was claiming that this was Chassidus. Obviously, somebody who hasn't learned even the first few letters of the Tanya. But when you look at a Chabad house, you right away see where it's going. It's not built on circumstances. It's all built on forging a new path. So bittul, nullification before God, cannot mean merging into reality, which is, again, it's a very admirable thing, and that's what Noah did in a certain sense. It's just to be able to weather life, to be able to get through it, and try to be one with everything, and so on. But Chassidus, especially as taught by the Alter Rebbe, as developed by the Alter Rebbe from the Baal Shem Tov, is about forging a new reality. It's about going against the circumstances with the understanding that reality, as we'll see in this chapter very strongly, is yearning really for us to fulfill our potential. That really is what we were created for, in order to bring out from reality its hidden positive potential, the godliness within it. I want to say one more sentence about this, that one can come to the incorrect conclusion that forging a new reality means piercing reality, means going against it. It's not the same thing. Changing the circumstances doesn't have to be with din, as it's called. Doesn't have to be with judgment, with an oppositional stance. You don't have to stand opposed. What you do have to have is a very adamant stance. You have to be very certain that reality does want to help you. You have to really be convinced that your will is reflecting something higher that's coming from God. If you don't have that adamant stance about your own desire in the sense of fulfilling God's will, then you can't really change reality. On the other hand, if you go too far and you become judgmental of reality, and you begin to think that you have to fight against reality, that also is an incorrect stance, because, as we'll see, the most you need to do at the end of the process is to open your eyes. Opening your eyes, as we'll see, is a task. It's not just opening the eyes the way that I do in the morning. Opening one's eyes is a form of divine service that allows one to see the goodness within reality, and allows us to understand why reality wanted our input all along. Not just our input, reality wanted us to bring out the goodness inherent in it. It was waiting for that. So opening the eyes, what the Rebbe used to say about opening your eyes to see Mashiach, that's a change in the perspective we have on our reality. And it's a necessary step. We'll see that there are 4 different steps for really changing reality in this way. But I just wanted to stress, again, that it's not an oppositional, it's not a contrarian stance towards reality. It's a stance that has deep faith that reality is overwhelmingly good and potentially entirely good. And it wants to bring that out, but it's waiting for me to contribute. Meaning, in other words, it's playing with me in a certain sense, waiting for me to truly look for that goodness in it. And I've used before the analogy, which I learned from one of my students a few years ago, that our pursuit of reality, of the world, of people, is like the pursuit of a young man after a woman who needs to prove, the young man has to prove his intentions. And he has to show that his intentions are positive, that they're, as they used to call it in America, honorable. And that what he really wants to do is to take care of reality. Okay, so we talked about this last time. Let's continue on with the chapter and read the text. The sages described Noah as one of small faith. In Hebrew that means mikatnei amana. Amana is a form of faith. It's like emunah is faith, the noun. Amana is of faith. While the prophets describe Abraham, this is in the book of Joshua, as the great man among giants. So it's between small-mindedness and great-mindedness. What he's hinting at here really is that faith has 2 levels or 2 stages that we go through in our faith. One is called small-mindedness or small faith, minor faith, and then the other is called the great-mindedness, the higher faith. The difference between them is that at the lower stage, like Noah, faith is to hold us in place. It's to keep us above water. It's to keep us treading water. Faith is meant to allow us to survive. That's Noah's message to the world. You can even survive a deluge if you have faith in God. You can survive all the ups and downs of reality if you have faith in God. Abraham's faith is already what we call the major faith, mochin de gadlut, great-mindedness. And by Abraham, the second stage of faith is not just about surviving reality, but about shaping it and forming it. And we mentioned this before, that the sages give this parable of a person who saw a burning house and said, somebody has to put out the fire. And so he starts bringing buckets of water, and he takes responsibility for that house that's burning down, because it's not okay to let things just be destroyed. All the more so about the entire world, which is what the parable is hinting at, that Abraham decided that if the world is on fire, in the sense that people don't know God, then it's my duty to put the fire out. And how does he put the fire out? He brings water. And Abraham's way of teaching people about godliness is through his acts of loving kindness, which are nothing but the revelation of godliness. That's what they are. Every act of loving kindness is an act of godliness. I think we've talked about this before, but it's the ability to go beyond my needs and to see the needs of others. For that, you need to have an inspiration from the infinite. You have to have an inspiration from what's beyond yourself, beyond your limited life. Okay, Abraham elevated to great faith in God. Again, this is the higher faith. Even before the covenant between the shards. As the verse indicates, you see, if you look in the verses there, you'll see that this verse comes before God tells him, walk before me. As it says, and Abraham, believed in God, and he considered it as his kindness. He is God. God considered it to be Abraham's kindness. And we'll need to talk about this in a moment. That is when he integrated the measure of equanimity, hishtavut in Hebrew. As indicated by his words to God, Abraham said, "For you have not given me offspring," which in Hebrew is hen li lo natata zara, which in Hebrew literally means, the literal meaning of hen li lo natata zara, the first three words, hen li lo, literally in Hebrew they mean, yes for me is like no. Hen li lo. Hen in ancient Greek and also in Hebrew means yes. So hen, saying yes to me, God, and saying no to me is the same to me, which in Hebrew literally means yes for me is like no. Both options are just as well, as explained by the Baal Shem Tov. So what does he want to say here? That Abraham, before receiving the instruction to walk before God, he mastered something that's higher than what Noach mastered in faith. Again, to walk before God is already more than just faith. As we'll see, to walk before God, you're using your feet to walk. So the feet, they correspond to victory and acknowledgement, netzach and hod. And as we've been talking throughout the series, victory and acknowledgement, when it comes to the psyche, they represent bitachon and tmimut, trust or confidence and earnestness. And they represent the two forms of confidence, active confidence and passive confidence. So Abraham being told to walk before God, that was already his change, his transformation into confidence, into taking responsibility for his reality and changing it. But before that, he had to come to a higher level of faith. What was Abraham's faith before this statement that he said, yes for me is like no? His level was like Noach's, which was that I can make it through whatever the circumstances are. I'll have simple faith in God, and that itself will carry me through. In the same way that Noach made it through a trial by water, the flood, Abraham made it through a trial by fire in Ul Kasdim when he was thrown into the fiery furnace by Nimrod. What got him through is the same thing that got him through Noach. What was it? His faith, his simple faith that God is the master of the universe. And if I put my faith in God, it'll all be okay. Everything's good. But that's not the same thing as when it comes to stating what you expect from life, what you expect from the world. I want to detail the statement a lot. What does this mean? What does it mean that a person goes to higher faith than just having simple faith in God? Simple faith, like Noach, doesn't mean that I have an invested interest in reality. Noach didn't have interest in saving the world. Noach was interested in saving at most himself But again, because he was a man of faith, so he's not doing it because of self-interest. He's doing it because this is what God revealed to him. Noach would have been content to be saved alone, even, if that's what God would have said. We don't see Noach working hard to convince God to let more people onto the ark. He doesn't do that. He never has an argument with God like Abraham did over Sodom and Gomorrah. He never contests the Almighty's decision that he's going to destroy the world and that only Noach and his family and 2 animals from the non-kosher species and 7 from the kosher species will be saved. He never does anything like that. For him, as far as he's concerned, this is what God wants, this is what I do. He doesn't include, he's so without, he doesn't even have will in that sense. Certainly not will that, like Abraham, wants to change something. But we don't find Noach to be restless. In fact, Noach means restful. It's like a person who's very easy to get along with. For God, it's wonderful. Why is it wonderful? Because here's a man who does exactly what I want, nothing else, and that's it. You get no contest. You get there's no dialogue really. So that's called small faith, which means again that I don't have any interest in reality itself. Even in my faith, for me, the only thing that exists is God. That's all. Higher faith, the type of faith that Abraham reached, is completely different. It already says, I have an interest in the world. I have an interest in others. I have interests that go beyond simple faith in God. In Abraham's case, his most important interest was his interest in giving birth to a nation, to a people. Because Abraham knew that if his message was going to be successful and other people would connect to it, that other people would feel that they need to take responsibility for their lives, need to take responsibility for their relationships. For that to work, he's going to have to give birth to a nation that will teach this to the world. Because Abraham tried by himself and he saw that it doesn't work that way. There has to be an example in this nation that will be begotten from him of what it means that people have a vested interest in one another, that people feel responsible for one another's goodness. Abraham needed to have that. So, again, it was because of his faith in God, but he didn't see it as he needs to change reality. He just was interested in reality. And for him, this could happen in many, many generations. That's fine. And how would this happen? He had to have a son who would be the forefather of this people. At the time when God made the covenant of the shards with him, Abraham didn't have his own son from Sarah. He had a son that was born from their Egyptian maidservant, who, according to the Medrash, was a princess in Egypt, but she was not his wife, Hagar, and he had Ishmael from her. But what did Abraham say that made him, what was the sign that he had moved to higher faith, to this greater faith, to this faith of great-mindedness? So the sign was that he said, Hen li lo natata zara. Indeed, you have not given me, you, God, have not given me offspring, because he only had Ishmael, not from Sarah. But again, as the Baal Shem Tov explains this, it doesn't mean just a statement or fact, and it certainly doesn't mean a rebuke of heaven saying, but you haven't given me offspring. And at the beginning of the covenant of the shards, God tells him, I promise you offspring. And then Abraham says, but you haven't given me offspring. Says Baal Shem, that's not what it means. It means whether you give me or you don't give me, yes and no for me are the same. For me, li, it's very critical. There's a person here who has will, who wants something, who has a picture in his mind of how things should progress for him to be able to fix the world. How should they progress? In his mind, he needs to have a son from Sarah. And that son needs to be fruitful. And he has to beget a people. But the faith here is, again, to remove, and we're going now back to the very first thing we learned in this long series, to remove, to purge the heart of what it holds to be dear and necessary in order to achieve our fulfillment, in order to achieve our mission in life. That's what greater faith means. It means, in a certain sense, that I am using faith to further my ability to act in the world. Because as it is, Abraham came to an impasse here. It was impossible to continue from this moment. Because God has promised him that he'll have offspring. He doesn't have offspring. He hasn't had offspring for 20 years that he's been married to Sarah. So he doesn't see how this is going to happen. And in his mind, even beyond that, astrologically he knows that he and Sarah cannot have children. So that's like you would say that today they've been through all the tests and they can't have children. And now God comes and says, I'm going to give you a child. So he removes from his emotions, from his heart, the whole world of expectation for a child. He removes it, he purges it. But more importantly, he purges it not in the sense that he doesn't want a child anymore. He just says, however it will be, it will be. It might be the way I thought of it until now, and it might be in some other way that I haven't thought of it yet. But in either case, I continue to have faith in God. I continue to have faith in the mission that God sent me for. Again, in his mind, his machination, his plan is that he and Sarah have to have a child. But he's open now to the possibility that this won't be the way that he planned. In fact, he's willing to give up on the whole plan, even though God just promised him. He says, God promised me maybe as a reflection of what I want, but I'm also willing to completely purge that will from me. I'm willing to purge those thoughts that this is the only way for me to create lasting change in reality by having a son. He's willing to forego that. And that's what we called, when we started learning faith and confidence many months ago, that's what we called faith that purges, that cleanses, that creates an empty space in the heart, which can then be filled with divine will, which can then be filled with what God intended, and not just what I thought should be. So actually, one of the most important stages in being able to pursue our will is to actually purge it, or at least to purge the emotions that go with it, the expectations, the investment, the emotional investment in this certain direction that you wanted to go in. Confidence starts, meaning following our will starts by, first of all, accepting the fact that my will may not happen. That the way I see things, the way that I've been analyzing my reality, may be so off that it won't happen. And that's not what God wants. And so he says, Hein li lo. For me, my will, what I want, for my heart, yes is like no. I've come to a place of equanimity. They're equal before me. Because in the end, that's what faith means. It's just a higher form of faith. By Noach, we said he had no will. Here, Abraham, that's exactly what we drew last time. I don't know if you saw that. If you're on Patreon, then you saw the Word file that also included the drawings I tried to do last time on Zoom. They didn't come out so great on Zoom, but then I did them a little bit better on Word. So that's like the moment in which Abraham cancels out his will. He acknowledges his will, but he cancels it out in order to be one with God. And from that moment on, the line or the ray of infinite light can begin to enter into him, and not only not cancel his will, but actually to invest itself in his will. Godliness invests itself in what Abraham wants. But this necessary stage, a stage of becoming one in the sense of canceling my will. And how do I cancel it? Not just by saying I don't want anything. That's not wanting. That's not canceling the will. Canceling the will is not to say I don't have any will. It's to say that my will is exactly how you'll do it. You, Hashem. However you plan on doing this. Hein li lo, natata zara. Yes for me is like no, whether or not you give me offspring. They're the same to me, because what I really want is to be one with you. But there's an understanding here that to be one with God, you can't be a partial oneness. You have to have everything. You have to have your will intact. It's just that your will has to be willing to accept the divine will, to be invested with what God wants and not necessarily with what you think is right. In other words, sort of like if I try to give it some kind of analogy. So you're going on a trip with your children, and they really had their hearts set on going somewhere, and then you decide, look, we can't go there, we'll go somewhere else. So at first they make they're all angry that why we're not going where we planned and so on. And then eventually you convince them, look, where we're going is also good and so on, but they go reluctantly. So their will has not been invested with your will. They're not able to take your will and use it and make it theirs. A good assistant, for instance, a good secretary or assistant or whatever you call it, is somebody who's willing to nullify their own will and to serve at the pleasure or at the will of someone else. But not just to serve them because they want a paycheck at the end of the month. It's because, ideally, they hold this person in tremendous esteem. And they say, it's true that I have will, but I am more impressed with their will, this person that I hold in esteem, and therefore I'd like to serve them. I would like to help them. How can I help them? By taking part of their will, adapting it as my own, and fulfilling it through myself. And that way, taking care of their needs as well as not just taking care of them, as well as identifying with them. So that was Abraham's important shift from where he was, from where Noach was. The Noach certainly couldn't talk about taking his will and transforming it, investing it with divine will. But again, this is called still faith, because at this stage, all that there is the divine will. There's no clear understanding yet of what is it that I want. It's rather I've taken my will and I've nullified it before God, in the sense of now I'm taking on your will, and however you want is fine. And again, Noach couldn't reach that level. So therefore, let's continue with the article. When commanded to perform the covenant of circumcision, Abraham ascended to a higher level of sanctity through the changing of his name, indicating that his very essence had changed. As the sages say, Avram cannot have children. Avraham, Abraham, can. And so we see this infusion of the divine will into Abraham happening through the change in his name. The moment that his name changed, it represents like a new mission in life. Except, again, the name change was done by God himself. It was God himself who told Abraham, no longer shall you be called Avram, from now on you'll be called Avraham. Somebody wants me to get closer to the mic. I hope this helps. Okay. So when commanded to perform the covenant of circumcision, so circumcision also, what is circumcision doing? It's preparing. The circumcision is not just, circumcision was really the final stage in this whole process. The first stage was that Abraham said, yes for me is like no. The second stage was that God changed his name. That's the infusion of the divine will into Abraham's will. The final stage is the circumcision itself. And the circumcision itself is like reality changing. But in what it meant, the circumcision, was opening the channel for the divine effluence to come down through him and to change reality. And what does changed reality look like? It says, Avram cannot have children, Avraham can. Adding this letter Hey to his name changes his ability to affect reality. If until now he wasn't able to change reality by having children, from now on he will be able to. This change implies that he was given the power from above to rise even higher, meaning higher from faith. And like we said, the circumcision allows him now to practice confidence. From his measure of faith in God to where he could attain confidence in God's goodness as it appears openly to human eyes. And again, the idiom is that when the effluence comes down fully into reality, all you need to do is open your eyes to see that things are good. That's all that's needed. And the opening of the eyes is the opening of a perspective on reality that can begin to uncover. It sees the goodness in reality. It sees how much godliness is waiting to erupt from reality. And here we have, I don't remember where the actual gematria appears, but that faith equals 6 times good. Meaning faith as the first stage here is like hiding the goodness that's in the heart. The heart has 6 emotions, and each one is good. So 6 times good is 17. 6 times 17 is 102. So 102 is the value of faith. So faith opens up our ability to see goodness in reality, but also in our reality. If faith was what cleansed, purged the heart from all our machinations, from all our attachments, from there it becomes what infuses the heart with a feeling of goodness in each one of our attributes, in each one of our heartfelt attributes. So that loving kindness becomes good, and might becomes good, and beauty becomes good, and victory and acknowledgement and foundation, they all become good. You feel goodness. It's like the sign that you've really been able to open up, to circumcise yourself. Obviously, circumcision is not just physical circumcision. There's also circumcision of the heart. So circumcision of the heart is making it possible for the heart to become a conduit for the goodness that's coming from above into reality and is being revealed in reality at every moment. The prominence of confidence over faith is described in the writings of the Arizal, in the Rayanic Kabbalah, as like the prominence of the straightness, the spirit, over the circular. So we've learned a great deal about that. And again, that's the difference between the circle, which is faith, and the line, the ray of infinite light, which is confidence. So confidence is prominent because the faith is likened to the human psyche, but confidence is likened to the human spirit. That's a very big difference. The psyche, where does the psyche dwell? The psyche dwells in the blood. That's how it's described. One way of thinking about this is that depending on our psychological state, our bodies change because our psychology affects our blood directly. That's the simplest meaning of Hadam wa Nefesh. The blood is the psyche. It's the animate part of our spiritual being. So when we have a certain outlook on life, when we have a certain outlook on things, it directly affects our bloodstream. It directly affects how our blood works in our bodies. And so it's distributed throughout the body. This particular, exactly how it's translated, I don't know if anybody will ever know. But thoughts have, our psychological state has an effect on how our bodies operate. A very clear effect. It's the mind-body connection. So psyche, mind, you can almost call them the same thing. It operates through the blood. And the blood here in this sense is like survival. It's our survival instinct. We need the blood in order to live. The blood is what takes care of the body's basic physical needs. Beyond that is the spirit. Ruach. Halo ruach hi be'enosh. Ruach, spirit. The human spirit is greater than the human psyche, because the psyche may be broken and tired and without life, but the spirit, the human spirit, is what lifts us, because we have spirit, exactly like the word means. He's spirited. It means we have energy. It's much more than just being alive. It's having a direction. It's having hope, if you want. We learned about Kav, the line, the ray of light, and the word hope, tikva, and how they're related. We talked about this when we talked about Rachav, the woman from Jericho, Okay. One can think of the image of a person walking straight towards his goal. Something that we didn't mention is that in Hebrew there are many synonyms for walking or for a path. One of them is obviously derech. Derech means a path, and usually when you say derech, you mean a straight line. But there's another word that was most commonly used by David and Solomon, because we find this usage in their books, in Psalms, in Proverbs, and in Ecclesiastes. They're almost non-existent in the prophets, this word. The word is ma'agalot, or ma'agal. So if you ask a modern Hebrew speaker today, what does ma'agal mean? He'll say it means a circle. But again, in Psalms and Proverbs and in Ecclesiastes, ma'aglotecha means your paths, your path. But it's a circular path. It's not, again, in the way that David and Solomon use it, they mean going from point A to point B, but they use the word for circle to describe the synonym of path, of a direction. This is an understanding that ma'agalot meaning circularity, which is like the psyche, can also be a path. Or in the case of, again, going back to Noah's Ark, the ups and downs of life, those are like a path. Even though it would seem that really you're not getting anywhere, you're just treading water. Okay? But that itself is also a path in and of itself. So that is walking in a circle. That's Noach's following God. Whenever you follow, you're in a cycle, you're in a circle. Why a cycle? Because life has its ups and downs and ups and downs. It's like a sine wave. That's circularity. Every sine wave has to have pi in it. Okay. But when you have direction, like confidence, like Abraham, lech lecha, 100. Lech lecha equals 100, 10 squared. You're talking about sides that have straight edges. It's not circular anymore. Because it's not circular, it's directional. It has a direction that it's moving in. It's not just a cycle. It's not just treading water. It's trying to attain some goal, and in this case, it's attaining the fulfillment of a person's mission in life. One can think of the image of a person walking straight towards his goal, like Nachshon ben Aminadab. So who had this straight path? So Nachshon. Moshe said, we have to go to Mount Sinai. And so Nachshon said, where's Mount Sinai? He says, on the other end of this water. Okay, if that's where it is, let's start moving. What do you mean? Why not go around? Because for Nachshon, who has like Abraham's understanding, I have to just go. I have to break through. But again, not in an oppositional stance, but rather the moment that I'll take the step, which is exactly what happened to Nachshon, the water began to split. Because that's what God really wants. It's what the waters really want. The waters were created with that stipulation that when the Jewish people would come on this and this date, and they would appear and they would want to cross the Red Sea, so the waters would open up. So one can think of the image of a person walking straight towards his goal, like Nachshon ben Aminadab, who simply leapt into the waters of the Red Sea, even as the Jewish people were being directly pursued. They were walking straight towards their goal, Mount Sinai. Walking straight and directly towards one's goals means no circumventing, no detours. Okay, so this is where we're going to end today. And if anybody wants to ask something, so now's the time. I think you can unmute yourself. In the meantime, I'm going to close the Facebook recording.